shit. Here we go again.
There's a hidden art in Formula One that goes far beyond mere horsepower. It's the reason certain engines can make your spine tingle and your heart pound through your chest with every gear shift. For years, fans have wondered why some cars produced ear-splitting shrieks that almost sounded too perfect, like a carefully tuned symphony rather than random combustion. What if there was a single, overlooked piece of technology responsible for that musical scream? A quiet revolution that transformed raw engine noise into something beyond ordinary decibels. Back in the days of roaring V12s and howling V10s, Formula One had an unmistakable identity. The sound was harsh, powerful, and deeply emotional. Every time a car blasted down the straight, it was as though the entire stadium vibrated with adrenaline. But somewhere toward the late 1990s, the tone subtly shifted. It wasn't simply that the engines were better or the regulations had changed. There was something else. Whispers began circulating that a handful of teams had stumbled upon a secret so effective, it bordered on magic, an innovative approach to shaping their exhaust headers. At first, it just seemed like gossip. After all, F1 teams were no strangers to cutting-edge engineering. They tested advanced aerodynamics, dabbled in exotic materials, and fought tooth and nail for even the tiniest advantage. Yet, a few people in the paddock claimed to have noticed unusual patterns in the exhaust pipes. Something about the shape and structure wasn't quite standard. Were these just random modifications, or was there a well-guarded technique behind them? Every rumor pointed to stepped headers. That phrase alone might not sound like a blockbuster revelation, but for those who understood the nuances of acoustics and fluid dynamics, it was game-changing. Instead of a single smooth tube guiding exhaust gases from the cylinder to the collector, these headers featured multiple steps, small increases in diameter at precisely calculated intervals. On paper, it might look simple. In practice, it had the power to transform how pressure waves move through an engine, turning disorganized noise into an orchestrated scream. It all came to a head when certain fabricators started receiving cryptic phone calls. One question in particular seemed to be repeated like a secret code. How many times did you step the tubes? From the outside, that might sound like nothing more than a technical query. But for those on the inside, it was the final clue to uncovering how certain teams had managed to achieve that unmistakable pitch. By carefully segmenting the exhaust and controlling the point at which the pipe diameter changed, engineers discovered they could multiply and stretch pressure waves. The result was pure music, an almost mesmerizing wail that fans still talk about decades later. Around the 1997-1998 season, more than a few observers noted that some F1 cars suddenly had a sharper, more melodic quality to their sound. It wasn't a massive shift all at once, but it was noticeable to those who had spent years listening to trackside audio. Allegedly, the FIA hadn't prohibited stepped headers outright. Perhaps nobody realized just how impactful this approach could be. Or maybe the teams kept the technique under wraps to avoid prying eyes. Whether it was an official blind spot or a hush-hush arrangement remains a subject of debate among the more conspiracy-minded fans. But that didn't stop people from speculating. Were these innovations leveling the playing field, or did they hand certain teams a decisive edge? Talk spread fast in race shops and on online forums, describing it as a form of sound doping. Some even suggested it was a crafty way to market the sport by preserving the signature scream that F1 was famous for, at a time when regulations threatened to muffle the engines. Critics argued that artificially manipulating the exhaust note was unnecessary showmanship, while supporters claimed it was simply an evolution of existing engineering methods. The controversies only deepened as more teams adopted or experimented with step designs, each one seeking that elusive, perfect pitch. One of the biggest questions was whether stepped headers provided more than just a captivating roar. Did they give a tangible performance advantage, potentially allowing the engine to scavenge exhaust gases more efficiently and thus produce more power? Several retired engineers stepped forward, offering vague hints that indeed, properly stepped headers could yield gains beyond aesthetics. They danced around specifics, never fully admitting to the scale of the advantage. But the subtext was clear. You could get a small horsepower increase and an unmistakable scream. all in one clever package. Now imagine being a dedicated fan who spent years obsessing over F1 audio clips, analyzing waveforms, searching for the source of that special resonance. That's exactly what happened to a few keen observers who decided to compare recordings from different seasons. They noticed how, in some cars, each cylinder firing didn't just produce a single pressure wave. It seemed multiplied and elongated, like ripples turning into unstoppable tsunamis. Everything pointed to one culprit: the stepped header. The question remained, though, just how many steps were involved? That puzzle was solved by a simple phone call. In one story that's gone around the racing community for years, a top-level fabricator casually asked a curious enthusiast, "How many times did you step the tubes?" As if the number alone would unlock the entire secret. Sure enough, once you start stacking those steps, 2, 3, or even 4 changes in diameter, the behavior of the exhaust pulses shifts drastically. Instead of a scattered jumble of sound waves, you get wave after wave of harmonics, dancing in sync until the engine note practically sings. It was the final missing piece that made everything click. There's another layer to this. Even though stepped headers became better known, there were still variations only a handful of specialists could perfect. If the steps were too abrupt or mistimed, the result would be a rough, unflattering tone. If the tubes weren't the ideal length for the engine's firing sequence, you might as well have stuck with a traditional design. It was a balancing act, demanding a near obsession with detail, and it created an invisible divide between those who got it right and those who never quite found that sweet spot. As fans raved over the glorious noise that resulted, behind closed doors, some worried the technique would be regulated out of existence. Formula One leadership became increasingly fixated on fuel efficiency, cutting emissions, and adopting hybrid technology. By the early 2010s, the average trackside observer could tell the difference. The once titanic roar was dampened, replaced by a subdued growl. A chorus of displeasure erupted from fans who felt the soul of the sport was being compromised. The new power units were technologically brilliant, but lacked that old ferocity. Amid this shift, certain teams still tinkered with header design, but the window for significant acoustic innovation had narrowed. Rumors sprang up that if the FIA truly wanted to return to an ear-shattering spectacle, they could do so simply by relaxing engine regulations and letting stepped headers thrive. Some insiders whispered that the next big engine formula might quietly allow for more freedom in exhaust design, leading to a partial comeback of the high-pitched wail that once defined the sport. Others claimed that was just wishful thinking, that the drive for sustainability and efficiency would keep things quieter for the foreseeable future. Nobody really knows how it will play out, yet the speculation alone keeps fans on the edge of their seats. All of this raises a philosophical question about Formula One's identity. Is it defined by cutting-edge performance, or by the visceral thrill it delivers to millions of spectators around the world? The stepped header controversy sits right at that intersection. For some, it's a testament to pure engineering genius, an example of how creative minds can bend the rules of physics to achieve something extraordinary. For others, it's a symbol of the lengths teams will go to manipulate not just the competition, but also the theater of racing, so long as it captivates the audience and keeps sponsors happy. Even now, people argue about whether stepped headers should be celebrated or viewed with suspicion. Were they a legitimate technical innovation that added a layer of magic to the sport, or did they cross the line into artificial spectacle? There's no definitive answer, but one thing is certain. Once you've heard that screaming note, you can't forget it. It grabs hold of you and reminds you why so many of us fell in love with racing in the first place. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful defense for these so-called cheat code headers. In the grand scheme, it's amazing to think a seemingly small tweak, a few carefully placed steps in the exhaust tubing, could change how an engine note resonates across an entire racetrack. It's even more astonishing to consider how fiercely guarded that secret was for so long. This was the stuff of quiet phone calls, cryptic questions, and knowledge shared only among the initiated. Some fans suspect the silence persisted because stepping the tubes offered such a substantial advantage that no team wanted to tip off the competition. Others maintain it was simply a matter of pride, or a desire to preserve the mystique that makes Formula One so alluring. Fast forward to today, and you'll find a community of gearheads who refuse to let that tradition die. Private builders, historical series participants, and even track day enthusiasts continue to chase the classic shriek, stepping their own headers in search of the elusive melody once heard at Monaco and Suzuka. They trade notes online, share experiences, and try to replicate the phenomenon in garages far from the bright lights of professional motorsport. In many ways, they're the keepers of a flame that official regulations might have long snuffed out. None of this guarantees that the next generation of F1 cars will revert to screaming V12s, or even that stepped headers will become the norm again. The sport marches on, shaped by environmental concerns, cost caps, and technological progress. But the longing for that iconic sound hasn't vanished. Every now and then, you still catch a rumor that certain teams are pushing for more engine freedom in the next set of rules, or that they've quietly tested new exhaust concepts on a closed track. Whether any of these tests rely on multiple steps or some novel shape remains a mystery, but the possibility is enough to ignite imaginations around the world. As the current grid roars, or, in some opinions, merely hums, through circuits across the globe, one can't help but wonder what might happen if the FIS suddenly gave everyone free rein to maximize engine acoustics. Would teams resurrect old proven methods like stepped headers, or have they evolved past that, heading toward even more sophisticated solutions that surpass anything we've seen before? History suggests that given any opening, the most innovative minds in the paddock will always find a way to push the boundaries. Even if they're not explicitly allowed, secrets have a way of sneaking into the sport the moment they can be concealed under bodywork or disguised in innocuous-sounding technical documents. In the end, the real power of stepped headers goes beyond performance metrics or decibel levels. It's about keeping the flame of excitement alive in motorsport. Racing, at its heart, is about drama, passion, and the spectacle of machinery pushed to its limits. When you strip away the noise, you also lose a piece of that visceral experience which captures the imaginations of fans worldwide. That's why people still reminisce about the old days of ear-bursting trackside experiences and seek to replicate that magic, if only in minor ways, with personal builds and retro-inspired series. So the next time you watch a historic F1 clip and hear that incredible wail, remember there was more to it than raw displacement or a high rev limit. Behind the scenes, a handful of innovators discovered how to manipulate pressure waves to create a kind of automotive symphony. They did so quietly, sharing knowledge in coded conversations and guarded phone calls, aware that once the secret got out, the playing field would never be the same. And in many respects, it wasn't. Where Formula One goes from here is still open-ended. Will we see a renewed push to recapture the spirit of those older, louder engines, or are the hybrid turbos and muted exhausts here to stay? The argument rages on, and it's fueled by more than just nostalgia. For some, the future of motorsport depends on adopting greener tech and demonstrating global leadership in efficiency. For others, losing that trademark scream feels like sacrificing the very soul of racing. The tension between these perspectives may well shape F1's destiny in the coming years. If there's one takeaway from this secret, it's that innovations, especially those shrouded in mystery, can leave a lasting mark on the sport's identity. They remind us that beneath the polished surface of professional racing lies a world of experimentation, creative problem-solving, and relentless ambition. Stepped headers might seem like a small detail, but their ripple effects have been enormous. They changed how F1 sounded, how it was experienced by fans, and how it will be remembered by future generations. Now that you know about this hidden technique, perhaps the old recordings of V8s, V10s, and V12s will sound different. Maybe you'll notice the unique tonal shifts in certain cars and realize that someone behind the scenes painstakingly arranged each step for maximum effect. Or you may find yourself imagining a future F1 season where one courageous team sneaks these methods back into the regulations, just enough to reclaim that legendary howl. After all, motorsport history is full of cunning innovations that pop up when you least expect them. And so we land at the final question. Does Formula One need to bring back its thunderous roots to remain the pinnacle of motorsport, or should it march onward into a quieter, more efficient era? Fans have a way of making their voices heard, and the collective desire for raw, dramatic sound might one day tip the balance. Perhaps it already has. The true measure of stepped headers isn't just in horsepower gains or decibel levels, it's in how deeply they resonate in the hearts and minds of everyone who cherishes that awe-inspiring scream. Whatever happens, the knowledge of how to create that melodic roar is out there, passed on by those who refuse to let secrets stay buried. If the day comes when the regulations shift or the sport's priorities realign, you can bet that the hidden blueprint for stepped headers will be dusted off and refined for a new generation. Until then, we can celebrate the era that once was, when a singular approach to exhaust design captured an entire planet's imagination. And remember that sometimes the smallest details can make the biggest impact.